Hey guys, this is GameCow. Welcome to another Pokemon Trading Card Game History video. Today we will be discussing the 2023 rotation, which is Scarlet and Violet's first set. We're rotating some of the Sword and Shield cards, however, not Scarlet Violet ones obviously, and this is where our regulation marks finally start making sense, because we are moving into the Regulation Eon format. And that means all of the cards we'll talk about today have the D regulation mark on them. There are a couple of cards at the top here which do not rotate. We will discuss why in just a moment. But yeah, this is an interesting time. We did have a full Sword and Shield on, like full Sword and Shield Generation 8 block as a thing, which is kind of cool. We don't see that too often. I think maybe Generation 5 managed to do it with Black and White through Legendary Treasures, but most of the time you just don't get to see the entirety of a generation represented in one format. So that's kind of cool. Now, what are we losing here exactly? Well, we're losing the Sword and Shield base set, which really wasn't that powerful of a base set compared to the others. Like the new mechanic, Pokemon V and V Max, really weren't that great compared to the tag team stuff of the time. They weren't terrible. There's like Snorlax and Lapras were kind of okay, but most of them were relatively underpowered. The trainers, on the other hand, there were some really good trainers in here, as well as Aurora Energy too, which made Mewtwo and Mew kind of insane. So that's obviously pretty good. Rebel Clash, the second set here, did introduce some more interesting Pokemon VMAX, like Dragapult, whenever I see what that is over here. We'll definitely be discussing that one. But it didn't exactly stay in the format once it got a little bit stronger. There's plenty of honorable mention stuff in here, though, that's worth discussing, so that's what we'll do. Darkness Ablaze came out, and didn't really change anything, I'll be honest with you. Charizard did see play later, and like Eternatus was the big bad of this set, which certainly did do wonders at the time for being a new deck. But other than that, not a ton in here that was like super cool, so I guess that's a bit of a shame, but whatever. Champion's Path, the side set, came out in the meantime and introduced maybe like one card. It wasn't even for the time period either in the Alcremie, so sure, it was mostly a reprint set anyway, but yeah, there's like that, and Duraludon, I guess, is like the maybe Rotom Phone? I think Rotom Phone didn't come out before this, so sure, I guess, kind of a thing. Same with Vivid Voltage, to be completely honest with you. This set did age better than most of the other ones around it, because it did have amazing rares in here, including the ever-powerful Raikou that caused a lot of hassle the few times where it was going to show up, but yeah, not really super good before that. Kind of weird. It just took a very long time before the set did anything. And then Shining Fates is the last one. I took out all the shiny cards because I needed to not load quite so many things in, I'll be honest with you. And they're all reprints of stuff from the first 4 sets anyway, so who really cares? This one didn't have a ton of unique stuff, but Yveltal at least is kind of good to talk about. And I think Crobat VMAX first came out in here, so there is a couple of things that are noteworthy in this set. Bit of a strange one though, to be honest. The promos are almost entirely reprints, and I think any which aren't, maybe only the Surfetched, which I think was in this one of the sets as a full art after it came out here. Everything else is basically reprint or not very good in the first place, and I think that's how promos really need to stay, if I'm being real. You like having alternate artworks, and that's really fun, but if the promos are too playable, then it ends up becoming an issue. But that's a discussion topic for another day. One of the things I did want to mention is why this looks so messy down the bottom. Some of these cards didn't get printed in terms of numbers until very late into the format. I think the shiny Zacian and Zamazenta Vs down here. However, they did not change their regulation mark. They are still regulation mark D. So they do rotate even though they're printed within the last year of the game's existence at this point. So basically I was just like filtering out any regulation mark E cards that I saw and then moving everything up as is, mostly so I could put that as a discussion point. There you go. So here's how the structure of this is going to go. There may be breaks depending on if my voice dies halfway through this. The first row here is the trainer cards, which do not rotate, or at least have a slight caveat to their rotation, mostly this one. Here in the second row is the meta-relevant Pokemon for right now, which you will notice is not very many, because again, power creep really happened a lot during this gen, and in particular this lot is pretty heavily affected by that, where we have a ton of cards down here in the lower tiers, honorable mention down the bottom, and off-meta picks down here, or ones that used to be meta, super big meta cards. And yeah, there's a lot of trainers and stuff to go over as well. That's most of these still see play. I do want to briefly mention that a lot of the special energy don't particularly see play, like Coating Metal and the Horror Psychic especially, but I want to note them anyway because Lugia existing means that special energy like this could easily have been played at any given time if a particular type base deck was super important to the format. So, let's go over the particular trainers that we don't rotate here. There's a lot of obvious ones. Energy Retrieval isn't always even in format, but Energy Retrieval, Energy Search is there, Energy Switch is pretty much eternal, Pokeball, Potion, Switch, Rare Candy, these are all basically eternal format cards. You don't almost never see them rotate. I think Switch had one format where you couldn't play it for one set. That was kind of weird. But yeah, for the most part, they're always in format, so there you go. We have had prints of Boss and Research, which have had regulation marks later than what we currently are at. Even Research is actually getting printed immediately in Scarlet Violet Base Set. And I think Boss, in the form of Getsis, gets reprinted in Paldea Evolved. So they are still printing these with new regulation marks. We don't need to ever worry about those. Great Ball, I can't remember if there's a print that's still... I think there is one, but it's Regulation F or something. But there will be a print in Paldea Evolved, so we won't have to wait too long, even if it's not available right now, so that's worth noting. But then there's the weird ones. Unfortunately, Crushing Hammer just is always in format at this point. This is in Scarlet Violet Base Set. They just want to have the card around. I don't agree with it, but hey, it is how it be. But then, these are kind of cool ones. Palpad is getting reprinted in Scarlet Violet Base, so that will actually stay in format for a very, very long time. As long as probably 2026, which is kind of insane. Pokegear also getting printed in Scarlet Violet Base. Not a card you would expect to see, but a very good one to see nonetheless. And then Vitality Band, also not one that you would expect to see, but getting a reprint in Scarlet Violet Base Set with the new Pokemon tool rule that's they're no longer items in Scarlet Violet, so I guess it's getting a print for clarification as well, which is pretty good. Caper Toughness is the weird one, the odd one out here. Strictly speaking, this does rotate. However, in Paldea Evolved, there is a tool card called Bravery Charm, which effectively does exactly the same thing as Caper Toughness here, just without the restrictions placed on it, because we don't have Tag Team Pokemon V at this stage to prohibit you from using it on Pokemon V. So, functionally, this card will rotate, but practically speaking, one set later, it does get its show, and that is why we are noting it here. Let's go to the meta-relevant Pokemon then. Crobat V actually did dip out of play for quite a while when it was too much of a liability, in particular when the rotation happened that killed Mew. Until Manaphy came out, this was very hard to play, but it did make a resurgence. There are a lot of decks that play multiples of this at this stage, 2 copies of it even, and it's not hard to see why. When you bench it from hand, it's just Shaman EX, right? It's a hard once per turn, but draw until 6 in hand is ridiculous. It does have an evolution as well, that is an off-meta pick, but could still use it anyway. Coughing and Wheezing, I really didn't want to mention these because they didn't really go into decks too often, but the problem is, these alongside Eternatus at the very end here actually did win a regionals in the last format. So, and it did top a few times as well after that, so it's I kind of have to mention it. Coughing is noted for Ascension. If you go second and this is in the active, you can just evolve it from deck. And the Wheezing, when it's in the active, prevents the opponent from having abilities. Only the opponent, not you, so you can still do whatever the heck you want. And yeah, it's just really irritating. So, it does have a hefty retreat cost, but Hiding Darkness Energy removes that, so whatever. Also, Boost Shake is possible if you go first. This card is dumb. I'll mention the Eternatus with it because that was the main way that it saw play. Eternal Zone is just crazy. This did get power crept a fair bit though because of the fighting weakness being very prevalent in the format. Thank you Arceus for that one. And that's why, like, it did see a lot of success, but some people were very dedicated to this deck and ended up finding wins near the end of the format. Again, kind of not hard to see why. It can do 270 damage if you have a full field in play, but it gets wrecked by Avery, so if you tech against it, then blah, right? Collapse Stadium's also really bad. But, I mean, we're going to see this effect again, the whole 8-bench thing, with the depths, the, like, Terror depth, I forget exactly what it's called, but the Terapagos field, basically, where, yeah, 8-bench Pokemon is inherently busted, and this definitely abuses that to the max. Amazing Rare Raikou did not see play for a very long time, like all of the Amazing Rares, because this energy cost is just ridiculous. However, the card was always inherently broken, right? I say broken as in, like, incredibly overtuned for what it can do. 120 to the active, 120 to the bench with no restriction on using the attack next turn, just insane. If this thing doesn't immediately get dealt with, then you are doing ungodly amounts of damage for a single Kaiser. However, the energy cost was way too prohibitive until Lost Box. I did play this with the Porygon Z because that was just a fun deck to build, and it ended up working out very well, but Lost Box, being able to Mirage Gate to this thing, is when it truly shone. And Lugia afterwards being able to accelerate all manners of this type of energy to it just made it even better. So yeah, crazy card, bit sad to see it go, but there you go. Galarian Zigzagoon is something that saw play from the very start of its inception to the very end. There were still Kyogre Lost Box in particular still played this, so there you go. The big thing about this card is that we do technically get a sort of replacement in the Hawlucha. However, Hawlucha can only hit the bench. Even if it does hit two different ones, it doesn't hit active, and we also lose the scoop up net that comes in with this as well. So yeah, a bit of a shame to lose that. Amazing Ray also didn't see any play whatsoever until the Lost Box deck happened. I didn't even consider playing this in the Porygon Z deck, because you kind of can't, because you have to discard the basic energy attached to this Pokemon. So shame on that. However, it can scale to practically infinite damage. 400 is about the best you would get, but like 400 kills everything. So yeah, obviously a really powerful card if you can get it to pull off, and Lost Box was the way to do that. Zekrom was used in a couple of decks. It was like Flappy Box, and Kyogre Lost Box actually used it sometimes. I'm working with a Zamazenta build, but that's just my preference. A lightning focus build would actually play this, because Auto Paralysis is a very inherently strong effect. And it did see play because of the lack of switching cards that came out later on. In particular, Lugia ends up getting dunked by this if they don't put Dunsparce down, right? So you can kind of just force some weird situations with that. The self-damage is rough, but with scoop-up nets and stuff like that, it's really not that big of a deal. Yveltal, again, these amazing rare Pokemon didn't see play basically until... This one didn't see play until Lugia came out, because Mirage Gate alone is not good enough to deal with this one, right? It takes a double colorless as well as its 3 different types of energy, so that's just a bit too hard to play with when it comes to Lost Box. You need like 2 Mirage Gate plus an attach in order to do that. Bit impractical. However, Auto KO is the dumbest thing you could print on a card, right? Other than literally win the game, which technically happens sometimes. But yeah, if you can be affected by effects of attacks, you are just dead. And this card could trade up very well in the right circumstances. Vikavolt V did see play when it first came out, but it saw more play at the end of the lifespan here, because of the prevalence of Lugia, right? It could hit something for weakness, and Paralyzing Bolt is very annoying. This is always what I thought Seismitoad EX should have been, where it's a color plus a colorless to do its item locking, and that does make it less trivial to play. So worth noting. Yeah, if you could scale this up with something like Regieleki or Zapdos, then you can do a lot of damage alongside the item lock, and it can be very difficult to play around that. So yeah, obviously a strong card. Oranguru, there is an item card called Switching Cups which you could use to emulate this effect, but only one time, right? Being able to swap a card from your hand with the top one on the deck had so many amazing applications, from being Marnie and later on Iono proof, to being able to deliberately lost zone something correctly in your deck by just switching it first, right? You switch a card like Battle VIP Pass to the top of your deck, and then your flower selecting can lost zone it, and you guarantee picking up like 2 cards that you might want instead. So much practical application for this, and yeah, a bit of a shame that we lose it. It's a very good card for the format, unlike certain other Orangurus that we don't mention anymore, because yeah. Drizzile and Inteleon were not played initially, but should have been, I think, because these have always been disgusting. Evolve to search for trainer cards is wild as a thing on a single prizer, especially when Level Ball came out and Drizzile could be searched with that. Absolutely gross card for that. Level Ball, search for 1 trainer, that can be a supporter card to get you into the game a bit more, right? And then if it's like Irida, well, now Irida gets you another Drizzile and also another like item that you need. It's just ridiculous. So yeah, an Inteleon gets you 2. Why would you not play this? It's insane. So yeah, there's a couple of weaknesses to the engine, but not many, so there you go. And finally, Duraludon V. You could still play Duraludon V Max because there is the Dragon type single strike one. However, this was the better Duraludon V because it had functionally more HP. 30 less damage from attacks meant that it took like 250 instead of 230 to KO it. Technically, Gatling Slug actually did see some play at times as well, but it's not very powerful, so yeah. It's mostly there because it's the tankier version of the Duraludon card. On to the trainers. We have Capacious Bucket. Search your deck for 2 water energy cards, put them into hand. You know, Professor's Letter for water, always good. Palkia decks especially would play this quite a bit. There are a couple of decks we haven't really shown that would play this. Rapid Strike Box is a pretty good one for it with the Inteleon VMAX, but I guess it's just hard to like find that deck in particular. I think it comes out more later on, which is weird, but whatever. Evolution Incense is gigantic. I've always loved this card, and I'm sad to see it go, but this effectively makes Lugia play Capturing Aroma instead, which, gross. Hyper Potion was a very irritating card when the decks could use it. You had to discard 2 energy on the Pokemon it was used on, but heal 120 was very powerful, so yeah, that's obviously a good card for story type things, or for the big VMAXs that you would expect to 2-shot. Now you 3-shot them and you are very sad. Metal Saucer, these sort of acceleration cards have always been reasonably playable. This one was incredibly playable at the start of Sword and Shield, because Zacian was the big thing, right? So, very good card there. Ordinary Rod is getting functionally replaced by Super Rod in Paldea Evolved, but this does do a different thing, because you can get 3 energy or 3 Pokemon with Super Rod, but you also can get 4 cards with Ordinary Rod. So there are applications for both of them, and it's a shame to see it go. Quick Ball is functionally getting replaced by Nest Ball, but Nest Ball benches the Pokemon automatically, if you remember from Generation 7, and it also doesn't let you discard a card, which some decks do find very important. Think Lugia. So you have to really rethink your outlet plan in Lugia to get the Archeops into the discard, because you can't just Quick Ball one away anymore. Rotom Phone did see play in Mew. You look at the top 5 of the deck and stack one of them to the top. If you then have Genesect in play, you can draw that card. So you basically get to look 5 deep without drawing 5 cards first, which is pretty good. Sometimes your Genesect can only hit 2 cards, so it's good to be able to cherry pick one of the ones that you want. Scoop Up Net goes, which is very bad for all of these single prize toolboxy sort of things. Lost Box in general gets hit pretty hard by this one, because now you can't just use the same 2 Comfey 6 times in a turn. So this does slow the deck down a little bit, but then we get to start seeing the Lost Vacuum style come in instead. So it's not all over for them, obviously. Lost Box is very good to this day at time of recording, but yeah, this is a huge blow to them. Tool Scrapper is an interesting one to see go. We don't lose tool removal entirely because we do have access to Lost Vacuum, but this is the one with discard 2 in play, so the few times where tools were devastatingly important, this was a good card to have around. You did tend to see it as a one-off when tools were killer to a deck, right? But Lost Vacuum does the job well enough, so that's fine. Supporter-wise, Birdkeeper goes, which is a pretty good card to have. Just a switch on a supporter is nice, because you can Luminion search this. So maybe a bit of a shame that we lose this one. You do get to draw 3 cards, and there was technically an archetype around it, but none of those cards were worth mentioning other than the Rowlet down here, which could do 60 to one of the opponent's bench if you played Birdkeeper during that turn. You were never paying 3 colorless on that thing, so yeah. Leon didn't see that much play in the end. I honestly thought it saw more than it did, but I guess COVID era obviously definitely didn't help. But yeah, do 30 more damage to the opponent's active with your attacks is very strong. So, bit of a shame this didn't see that much extra play. I don't think I played it once during this its life cycle here, so that's kind of weird. Marnie was disgusting, and I never really liked this card design, I'll be honest with you. It did form an interesting thing with like a Rangaroo, being able to protect the top card of your deck from stuff that way, but this is just so irritating, right? Like, there were a lot of times where it felt like if you didn't play 4 Marnie, you were just trolling, and that was just sucky. Forcing the players to put all of their cards in the hand to the bottom of the deck, and then drawing 5 or 4 depending on who played the Marnie. Yeah, it's hand disruption, but it's just gross hand disruption. I don't know, like, I even feel like Judge is better than this in terms of healthy card design. It's just lame, whatever. Piers was used in a few Eternatus decks specifically, and I think I had maybe 1 or 2 other things I played a couple of copies in. It's a pretty reasonable card. Search your deck for any energy and the Darkness Pokemon. It was really good for Eternatus because you'd be able to get the Crobat plus, or like any Eternatus piece you needed, plus a Hiding Darkness energy, so that was always helpful. And yeah, just anytime you needed to search a special energy, this card was worth considering, because Zigzagoon was in the ton of decks, like the Crobat itself obviously being in a lot, so you get some draw power too. Very nice. I'm pretty sure Pokemon Center Lady rotates. This card didn't really see any play outside of exactly stuff like the stupid Stonejourner's Stole thing or whatever, but Heal 60 and all special conditions from the Pokemon would be a way around the Paralysis Lock stuff that happened in Silver Tempest format, so I guess it's worth noting that this goes away. Galar Mine was mostly a gimmick card, but it was used with Leafeon, VMAX, as well as the Milotic that I'll note down the bottom. Making the retreat cost of Pokemon 2 more isn't usually a big deal, but if your attack damage depends on the retreat cost stuff, it's obviously going to be very powerful, so there is that. Glimwood Tangle makes it so that players can reflip attacks coin toss once per turn. We don't see this effect again, I don't think, in the current time. Maybe we'll get like a Victini again that can do this, or we'll get the Lucky Medal or whatever it is, that tool card that ended up doing it. Maybe we'll get something like that again sometime, but for now, this is the last time we get to reflip the coin stuff. Maybe for the best, I don't know. Doom Decree on a basic is coming out soon, and that's very scary. Rose Tower was only really seen like twice, I think. Once in the Arcanine, very vulnerable to the Arcanine Zorard deck, which even then it was like only okay. The main use was when Mew first came out and was able to dump a ton of cards out of hand anyway because they were playing so many items and whatnot. Pokestop kind of filled the role in the end, but Pokestop does have different functionality, so yeah. Training Court is a sad one to see go because this card was really cool. Being able to put a basic energy from your discard pile into the hand always has a lot of applications. You can attach for turn readily, you can conceal cards away, which is really good, and it was just a nice counter stadium in general, so yeah, I'm a little sad to see that one go. Turffield was really good in Rebel Clash exactly when Rillaboom was a good deck. Being able, you know, the VMAX was the cool thing with it there. Being able to search for any evolution Evolution Grass Pokemon just meant that you could reliably get to your stuff without having to worry too much, and most decks weren't playing Evolution Grass Pokemon, so it was pretty good, effectively one-sided, which is something that Stadium cards usually suffer from, so good stuff there. Tool cards, we had Air Balloon come in here. This is the last time so far that we see this sort of generic 2 or like more than 1 energy retreat aid sort of thing come in, because there is a large one that is in Scarlet and Violet, but that only works on stage 2s, so yeah, you get to reduce your retreat cost by 2. Anything that is no more than a 2 energy retreat, this is functionally Floatstone, and Floatstone was one of the best tools in Gen 5, so yeah. Big Charm is a generic plus 30 HP, which I'm pretty sure doesn't have any other analog at the moment, so yeah, a little bit of a shame there, because not every deck can play Bravery Charm and stuff like that, so yeah, your big Pokemon can't get bigger that way, I guess. Whatever. Big Parasol is a bit of a loss solely because of Lost Box, to be honest. Yeah, being attached to the active and any effects of the opponent's attacks done to any of your Pokemon just don't exist, which is very good against Sableye. And losing this means that Sableye gets a lot more powerful, and it's here, I think, is when we start seeing the dislike for that card massively ramp up, so yeah. Memory Capsule was mostly used with the Gen 1 evolutions down here. I've got Jolteon because it was the meta relevant one at one point here, but the Vaporeon and Flareon also prevented like fire and grass Pokemon from having abilities as well. This was the main use for the card, was attaching it to those evolutions, but you could also attach it to certain V-Maxes and V-Stars that had useful Prevo attacks as well. There weren't very many of them. They never usually are, because they're very hesitant as card designers to print pre-evolution Pokemon with good attacks. And I find that a bit sad, to be honest, but it is how it be. I don't think we have any version of this in recent times, so this might be the last one for now, but don't ever count this out, because there's always like a Stadium or an ability, or there might be like a Celebi EX that comes out at some point, say, that will do this effect, so don't count this effect out. It will come back eventually. Telescopic Sight was really good for the Urshifu VMAX stuff, where you can do, with this and the Throwing Coach Passimian, you could snipe 180 on the opponent's bench Pokemon V, so that takes out Crobat, Luminion, etc. Very dangerous card, so yeah, unfortunately not future-proofed, obviously, so it wouldn't work on EXs and stuff anyway, so not that big of a deal now. Of the special energy, the main ones to note are Aurora Energy, because this is the last time we see a generic Rainbow Energy at the time of recording. We have Luminous Energy, which is multi-energy, come out later on, but you can only attach one special energy, that being the multi-energy, so like that card's really bad. We don't have another Rainbow effect other than Legacy Energy being an A-spec, so there's that. Capture Energy was very powerful from day 1 until the day it rotated, obviously. Who would have guessed that attaching an energy and also searching a Pokemon is a good effect, right? Very, very good. Search your deck for a basic thing is great. Speed Lightning was insanely good. Being able to draw 2 cards when you put it on a Biker Bolt or a Rotom or something. I mean, I'm abusing the heck out of this in the Silver Tempest, so very strong there. Powerful Colorless was insane for Lugia, and obviously saw some play before that too, but Lugia really takes advantage of this to wild degrees. Being able to scale it to 280 damage to KO everything is really good. I want to mention Twin Energy because I wish this didn't rotate. I think that having non-Rulebox Pokemon be able to, I mean, it has to rotate because of the way it's worded, but I want a reprint of this that has Rulebox instead of VOGX on it here. Because seriously, this card is really healthy for the format when it can't be used on like multi-prizes and Radiants and stuff like that. Please reprint it, it would be very nice. And then I guess the last major one is Hiding Darkness, because it was used for the Wheezing Eternatus stuff that won that the big regionals and whatnot. Gives you a Darkness Pokemon 0 Retreat. There's a few like Gengar, VMAX and stuff that do actually have crazy high retreat costs, so it's a nice card to have around for that. The other ones are more or less honorable mentions, but like the grass one didn't really, like special conditions are bad, so kind of whatever. Coating metal prevented weakness, but fire decks weren't that strong in this era, so you didn't generally have to worry about that too much. I guess outside of exactly Big Teeny, but whatever. Heat Fire was played in Lugia solely as a 5th copy of a tight energy free Beltol. That was it, basically. Fire Pokemon gained 20 extra HP, but Fire was pretty bad in this era, so we didn't really see it for that. Horror Psychic was played with a Dragapult, but didn't really see play after that stopped being useful, because its effect is really not that strong. Extra damage counters are nice, but the problem with these is that they don't get treated as their type of energy unless they are on a Pokemon, so you can't accelerate these from the hand, right? Stone Fighting Energy was cool if you could use it, but basically no deck could use it because fighting decks didn't really have acceleration as always anyway. 20 less damage from attacks is really good though. The Stone Journer deck liked that, but otherwise not really. And then Wash Water, you would see this as like a one-off in certain Palkia decks and whatnot, just because it could prevent effects of the opponent's attacks done to the water Pokemon it's attached to, which sometimes meant that like Sableye or Yveltal or something like that would get stopped. So yeah. Okay, let's talk about the meta-adjacent Pokemon over here, and there's 3 that I want to highlight in general because they did technically see some play during Silver Tempest, but they weren't really that great. I'm actually going to start with Zacian, because you would expect, oh my god, this card was so busted at the start of the generation, why is this not in the meta pick? Well, yes, Zacian V-Star did see a tiny bit of play. It was like top 32, I think was the highest it got to in a couple of regionals, but it really wasn't that good. And I don't think that this stayed like relevant in the format for a lot of the time. Like the V-Star was the only reason this even got looked at again, which is nuts to say because it's a 220 HP basic that does 230 damage, right? Why is that not still played? Well, regular Pokemon V just kind of got power crept out of the format. It was all about, especially when V-Stars came out, it was literally all about like V-Stars could survive this and then KO you back because 220 was a very reasonable number to hit. So it just didn't really last in the format, and I personally don't think the V-Star is all that good. Yeah, it lets you attack consecutively, but it also does less damage than this, and that is actually a relevant problem, because then you can't KO other Zacian, which is a bit of a shame. And, you know, cards like it. The next one is Eldegoss, and I think this did see some play because there were control decks that actually used its float-up attack as a main thing here, being able to shuffle it back into the deck and move into something which didn't take damage or otherwise was just like impossible for the opponent to deal with. Did actually see play, but the control deck wasn't that successful and it was only really a couple of players that even played it, and other than that, this just got kind of outshone by Luminion, because what is better than picking up a supporter from the discard pile? Typically, searching one out of the deck in the first place is the better option, because searching it out of the deck means that you can use it early on in the game before you've actually played a supporter card. Whereas if this is in your opening grip instead, or like you don't play the Luminion first, you end up not being able to start the game because you just didn't draw one of your supporter cards. So ultimately Luminion just did the job better in most decks, and that's why this went to off meta. The last one is Crobat V, specifically Crobat V Max, because this guy did see some play when Mew first dropped, because it was able to one-shot Mew and also evolved your Crobat. I think it might have seen a couple of tops before then, specifically in the Sylveon lists actually. You would sometimes see Crobat V Max if you weren't playing Moltres, because the V Max could evolve your 180 HP Crobat V that you've used to draw and get into the game, and then it can't get sniped by the Urshifu for, you know, all of your life savings. So I think it did see a little bit of play because of that, but mostly this card only really saw that one time in the Eternatus deck in recent history, so to honorable mentions it goes, right? I will say, Stealth Poison is a very annoying attack though, being able to poison and then switch to the Weezing so they don't have abilities. And Hisui and Sneasler letting you put extra damage counters down as well. racked up pretty quickly. Very irritating card, if nothing else. Right, with those out of the way, Galarian Meowth is pretty cool. You discard 2 cards from the hand. You never really evolve with this thing, but it is a once per turn discard 2 cards from your hand, which some decks really do want. Think even something like Lugia could use this to discard Archeops in the hand. Unfortunately, it doesn't really come up that often. I don't think there was a single deck that I saw that did well that ended up playing this, but it was certainly always a consideration in rogue decks and whatnot. Fun card. SwSh was mostly played in Colossal style decks, which I'll note later on in the honorable mentions bit, but this sees play, this was like outside of honorable mentions because you could play this with Arceus as well, being able to accelerate energy to even dumb things like Luminion that you don't need to, just to get them out of the deck, so that SwSh later on could absorb that energy and hit for fighting weakness, was pretty relevant, so it was a decent card. Gormandai Snorlax was insane for a lot of single price decks at the time. There were a lot of them that just allowed you to play, you know, a bunch of stuff down and just be like draw until 7 at the end of the turn, and if the opponent didn't exactly mana you, then you were going to have such a crazy hand next turn. A lot of setup decks would play this. However, Gift Energy kind of does its job better nowadays, because Gift Energy is more resilient to Mani and whatnot, and yeah, most decks kind of just outpace this at this point. Like, why would you do this when Lost Box exists, right? Is usually the question, so yeah. Snorlax VMAX, you could have maybe put this in honorable mentions, but I genuinely believe that if COVID didn't happen, this would have been a top deck of the time. This card was very powerful. Being able to do 60 plus 30 for each of your bench Pokemon is absolutely nuts. This does 210 base, and unfortunately, by the time Powerful Colors Energy was in format, we were very much into the no live events thing. But I'm pretty sure with Paragon Z and Powerful Colors, you could have done wonders with this thing. Absolutely insane card. Recycle Energy also was so good for it when it was out, so yeah, I really liked Snorlax. Very strong card. Galarian Obstagoon, mostly seen with the Decky Dewey, as Wolf used to call it. Decidueye over here. These two were paired in the same deck together. Decidueye prevented damage from Pokemon B and GX from hitting it whilst it was in play, and the Obstagoon mostly was used for Obstruct, where basic Pokemon, aka most of the other things you would see that aren't Vs or GXs, they couldn't attack you either. So it was just irritating. It was a lock deck that was very dumb. Obstagoon could also see play by itself because Untamed Shout lets you put 3 damage counters on one of the opponent's Pokemon when you evolve to it, so that was kind of cool, but unfortunately the Linoon like drops the ball and didn't put damage counters down as well. Otherwise I probably would have been playing this line the whole time. You probably would remember how much I enjoyed playing Crobat when that was a thing, so yeah, I would have played the heck out of that, but that's just not what it did, so oh well. Victini V is noteworthy because of the VMAX. This did actually see a bunch of play when the VMAX first came out. Spreading Flames is just inherently a very strong attack. The VMAX also has this, but the Victini V you have to use with it now isn't nearly as good as this. So yeah, very good acceleration attack for that deck. Played extremely well with Max, with like Cheryl and Air Balloon for the 2 energy retreat and all of that good stuff. Cinccino saw a decent amount of play in a bunch of stuff. It was lovable, searchable, it had its own control deck at the start of the Sword and Shield block, which was arguably best deck in format. We don't really get to know because of COVID, but yeah, this was one of the strongest decks of the time. Don't know if it would have beaten ADP, but there you go. Discard a card, draw 2 is always good. We are seeing this with the Curlier now as well, with Refinement being a thing, but yeah, this card just did it all at the time. It was incredibly searchable and very easy to use. Did see play as late as Zoroark box in Silver Tempest itself. That did get some top 32s, so good stuff. Malamar VMAX only really saw play with the Arceus stuff, but it was a very good anti-Mew version of Arceus. because grass is an uncommon weakness to have, and Max Jammer alongside Judge would be devastatingly strong. Imagine this with Roxanne actually now, right? If you Roxanne the opponent down to 2 cards in their hand, and then you just get to see them and take their supporter card away, devastating stuff, right? This card did see play for a while, but it ended up getting outclassed by other decks moving forward. Arceus as a whole just has a bit of an issue that way, so yeah. Mimikyu, I don't know if this should have been an honorable mention or not, because I don't remember seeing this as a tech anywhere, but bench Pokemon can't be healed on the opponent's side is definitely something worth noting, so I think this could have seen a decent bit of play. Again, it was during the COVID block though, so maybe there just wasn't enough appetite for it, but this stopped Malawalana from healing the Pokemon, even if they discarded cards for it, so yeah, would have been very good at the start of that time period. Tapu Koko is noteworthy for 2 reasons. When it first came out, it was a pivot in Pikarom because it had Zero Retreat natively, so you didn't have to play Zeraora for it. And then the other reason is because the Arceus Tapu Koko VMAX deck, which did see a tiny bit of success later on, thanks to the lightning typing, actually played this one as well because Zero Retreat is really good. So yeah, there is another Tapu Koko V at the moment, but it has a 1 retreat and the attacks aren't as good, so unfortunate for him. Rillaboom is really fun. Yeah, even as late as Silver Tempest, it is still seeing the tiniest bit of play. I think it's more like a top 64, top 128 sort of card, but yeah, Sai has seen it with the Regidrago, and it's just kind of neat. Being able to accelerate 2 grass energy from the deck is inherently super strong, and it was successful alongside Rillaboom VMAX when Rowlet Alone and Executor existed, and you were able to build that up very quickly. Good stuff. Speaking of the VMAX, the combination with it here, this discards energy from itself in order to do up to 280 damage. Very powerful, but it does rely on a stage 2 and effectively a stage 1 here in order to see play, so without Rowlet Executor being able to evolve the basic up to the Rillaboom like proper, it's a bit hard to actually justify playing this card anymore. Inteleon VMAX did see success with Tord Reklev specifically in the Players' Cups. I think he did actually win one? He either won one, I think no, he didn't win, maybe he did. It top 4'd at the very least, so it was very successful there. Like, Hydro Snipe is a good attack, I suppose, for its for efficiency side of things, and Max Bullet is decent spread. I think the lightning weakness is what kind of killed this a little bit because Pikarom was still really good at the time, but it did see past success, so I'll note it anyway. Dubwool was really, really good in the Rebel Clash format when it first came out, because fighting type stuff wasn't ridiculously popular at the time, and it did take less damage in general, so it took 240 health basically before it got KO'd, which is really good, and Revenge Blast got up to really nasty numbers at that time actually. Very powerful attack to have. I mean, Shaman would be proud, right? So yeah, good stuff. Bolton was mostly a Pikarom card, but it did see a decent amount of play because Bolt Storm scaled very well, and this kind of scaling attack does tend to see decent success so long as the scaling is good enough, and when you can accelerate free energy, it's definitely good enough. This one only accelerates 2 technically, but like the Pikarom build in general could accelerate more, right? So yeah, very good. Cramorant also saw quite a lot of play, especially in the Snorlax like Porygon Z thing when it first came out, because Spit Shot, discarding all the energy attached to it, doesn't matter if they're recycles, and then you get to snipe 160, which was exactly enough to KO Dedenne, and when Telescopic Sight came out, that makes it enough to KO Crobat. So yeah, definitely was useful. Also good for the first attack too, being able to search for any 2 cards. It's like Marnie Me or Perish basically. So cool stuff. Centiskorch I wanted to put in honorable mentions because I hated this card. It was never good. However, it was a very popular card in online scene at the time. So sure, it scales up its damage, which is great. It does a lot for the fire energy that's on it. You could tank with it, I suppose, putting heat fires, but I never saw any good deck with this. Just felt really bad, so yeah, that's my opinion. Alcremie was used specifically with Shadow Rider Calyrex. The Calyrex itself is still in format because that's Reg E, but this was its strongest attacker of the time, being able to discard any number of energy from across your board to do 60 for each one, in a deck that could inherently accelerate 3 to 4 extra energy in play every turn. Very, very powerful. Yeah, infinite damage, turns out it's really good. Also not weak to Dark, which the rest of the Psychic stuff is. Thank you, Fairy type. Frostmoth was seen here and there in a lot of different decks, most notably the Lapras, but that's, I guess, more of an honorable mention. But Inteleon White Box stuff also did a lot of work with this. It's more restricted than what a Blastoise would be because it's a stage 1, but it does accelerate water energy to benched water Pokemon as often as you want, which is very, very good for a stage 1. Water is a good type in general, tends to have a lot of good cards, so yeah, nice card to have. Both Dragapult V and VMAX are inherently worth noting here. The V is noteworthy for Jet Assault, which is your Golisopod Golisopod GX sort of thing, where if it goes from bench to active, it does bonus damage. Technically does 10 more damage than the Dragapult VMAX does over here, but the VMAX also puts 5 damage counters on the opponent's bench Pokemon however you want. Sound familiar? Yeah, this is the original Dragapult EX basically. Shred could also sometimes come up because putting 60 for 1 and also getting through Miltanks and Decidueyes and stuff like that technically could happen. So, yeah. Finally, Zamazenta prevented all damage done to it by Pokemon VMAX attacks. It's okay, it came up on occasion, wasn't really that played though. And we do have a better Zamazenta now, so yeah, there is that. Finally, the honorable mentions. We'll just very quickly go over these because they're not that good, but we enjoyed playing them, so at least it was that. Charizard, I don't think we ever technically showed this deck off, but I know Sai tried it at one point. It's, in theory, really good, right? It's bulky enough, stage 2. It can thin cards out of the deck and have more consistency, and it does 300 damage for 2 fire energy if you've got all 4 Leon in the discard pile. Problem is, getting 4 Leon in the discard pile is a heck of a task, so it's a bit tough to use. The Caterpie and Metapod both having adaptive evolution means they can evolve the turn that you put them down. This eventually culminated with Fusion Strike, having the Butterfree that could poison, burn, and confuse the opponent's active Pokemon. I'm pretty sure it's Confusion. In the same turn, it's either Sleep or Confusion. But being able to triple status them allowed you to play Salazzle or Sneasler V in order to do a ton of damage. Fun deck, not a very good one though. Ninetales I had a ton of fun with in Rebel Clash, very good as part of the Welder Box decks at the time, but also just good in any deck that could accelerate other energy too, because of the double colors cost here. Copying one of the opponent's attacks, that often ended up resulting in some pretty fun KOs, so I enjoyed it quite a bit. Lapras VMAX we played a couple of times. There was a very dumb deck initially with Electro GX that was able to accelerate like 5 to this thing and then reset the opponent's hand down with the reset stamp, being very stupid. But this then saw play with Frostmoth as well later on. There was a time when we tried this. Fun card, unfortunately weak to lightning, kinda killed it. Donphan was noteworthy with Spiritomb at the time, which did more damage based on the damage counter Spiritomb had. This hit for the very good fighting weakness against Pikarom, and then Spiritomb's Dark typing I think was very good against Dragapult that would resist the Donphan. 120 damage to 1 energy, pretty good, but it's got a bit of a heavy downside to it, and ultimately just wasn't like that crazy, but it's alright, saw some play. The Sableye was used a tiny bit. Again, not very much in the long run. Maybe if we had like better damage counter sniping and stuff, we could do it. But Crazy Claws could do an absolute boatload of damage if you put the right amount of counters down. The problem is it's a 170 HP 2-prizer. No amount of affirmative action is going to help there, right? Load Search is also a really good attack, but it's a 170 HP 2-prizer, that just ain't gonna fly. Altaria was the middle child of Miltank and Decidueye. Didn't see much play because Decidueye just turned out to be better for some reason. I think it's just because of the damage output on this was miserable. But yeah, it was a stage 1 that prevented damage from VGX stuff. That could disrupt a lot of decks, so there you go. I really enjoyed the Milotic. This was used with the Galar Mine because of Aqua Impact doing more damage for the retreat cost stuff. Welder Box was the thing with this. You just use this with Welder, double attach fire, put one water as the turn attach, and Aqua Impact was doing on average about 210 damage at the time, which was pretty good. Also a water type, so it dealt with the enemy Welder Box stuff. I liked it. I also really liked the Salamence over here. I mean, Heavy Storm is just a fun attack to say, but Swoop Across, kind of good if you could use it. You tended to do it with like a memory capsule or something, rather than keeping it as a Salamence V. But 30 damage to everything is quite good, but the VMAX is where it kind of really kicked in. Sonic Double for a single energy, being able to do 40 to 2 of the opponent's Pokemon, 60 to the active if you put Powerful Colors down is quite good, and Max Wings doing 240. Yes, for 4 energy, but we had triple acceleration at the time, and also Paragon Z was pretty useful here. It was good. Powerful Colors could make it one-shot a ton of stuff. The problem was it was lightning weak, and it came out during Pika Rom's era, so unfortunate. Cinderace was way better than I gave it credit for. This thing was my second deck in Sword and Shield block because it was actually pretty good. Being able to accelerate energy from the discard to itself to power up Flare Striker. Flare Striker doing 190 was a very relevant number because it meant that no matter what the opponent did, you could two-shot what they were doing. And yeah, it was good. Being able to keep recycling the same amount of energy, using recycle energy as the last one itself as well, meant it was like perpetually chargeable. It was very strong, surprisingly, for a single prize stage 2 attacker. Orbeetle wasn't very good in the end, unfortunately, but the idea of being able to switch between a bunch of them and putting damage counters on the opponent each time you did is inherently good. It's just a lot of setup and just didn't do enough in the end, sadly. The two Colossals are kind of cool, not in the same deck, but I did enjoy both of them. The Tar Generator over here was how the Sandaconda, which honorable mention, but that was its main attacker, but also Ninetales could get powered up with this as well. Being able to accelerate energy from the discard is self-sufficient, which is pretty good, and fighting is inherently a good type that tends to lack acceleration, so that's nice. Colossal VMAX did need to discard the top card of your deck and have it be an energy for it to accelerate, and really the problem with this card is that its second attack takes 4 energy to use, but it could accelerate any energy from your top deck. So if you put a Stone Fighting energy down on this thing, then it takes less damage and ends up being very hard to KO, which was good fun. Mad Party is the honorablest of honorable mentions here. This is a really bad version of Night March, to be honest, but yeah, it does more damage for each Mad Party Pokemon you have in the discard. Problem is, there were technically 4, so technically more than what the previous one had in Night March, but 2 of them with the stage 1s here. This guy only has 60 HP as well, and the pre-evolution doesn't have Mad Party. The Dene wasn't possible to attack with, and Bunnelby had 40 HP, so it just never was playable under any circumstance whatsoever. It was also very reliant on Twin Energy, just horrible, absolutely horrible. In theory, the consistency here would be great, but Sinistea not having Mad Party makes it useless, so yeah. Stonejourner, I did mention this very briefly with the deck stuff above and some of the healing cards. This ended up being like a very dumb pick for later on, when it's just single Stonejourner and that's it in play, and it never dies, and that's it. That's all you're trying to do. It's basically the old Steelix cards that were never really fun to play against. This one wasn't either. 330 HP with a grass weakness is so hard to KO though. Especially when it can heal itself with its first attack as well. Gross. Finally, Morpeko V, again, honorable of honorable mentions, but Pepper did have a deck that played this in the early days with Sword and Shield. I forget exactly what he was switching into with it. It was some sort of silly thing. I think it was the Pokédolls was the thing he was switching into at the time. And it's just like, yeah, you do a good amount of damage, does discard an energy, but it goes to the bench. This was a time when we didn't have Boss's Orders as well, because it was SwSh Base Set, so we only had Catcher that could attempt to Gust Up. We didn't even have Escape Rope at that time. I don't think it was a bad time to exist, really. So, yeah. And that's it. what a silly rotation this is, because you think about it and it's like the actual Pokemon, there's not a ton of these that are that crazy. We can live without Eternatus, that's just whatever. The amazing rares are good, but they're certainly not the only way that you could build a Lugia or Lost Box deck, and otherwise there's really nothing, right? But when you look at some of the trainer cards that we have, as well as all the energy that Lugia is losing here, this is where the real shakeup happens. And yeah, there's quite a few cards which are very noteworthy to lose here. Some of them do get replacements, like Quick Ball, but yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff which is very powerful that we will no longer have access to, as is the point of a rotation, I suppose. Thank you very much for listening if you have made it this far in. I do very much appreciate you. And next time we'll be going into our battle videos for Silver Tempest, where we've got 2 rounds. Since we are in a bit of a lull sort of bit, we want to finish off this format correct, I guess, before we move on to Scarlet Violet and everything changes again. And it should be fun. So until then, take care.